Welcome to Keeping Secrets, hosted by Julia Baum and Sabrina Tropper.
We're two licensed therapists here to give you an insider's perspective on therapy in today's modern world.
Whether you're a therapy goer, you've never been to therapy, or you have experience in the field, this podcast is for you.
We thank you for listening. Subscribe to Keeping Secrets to never miss an episode, and we hope you enjoyed today's show. Hello and welcome back. Today, or this week, we're going to be talking about green flags and some red flags also when you're looking for a new therapist. And this really applies to anybody, whether you've looked for therapists, whether you have one already, or you want to check in and evaluate and see how you're feeling about your current therapist, or if you've never looked for a therapist before. And this will be a good episode to listen to. So yeah, without further ado, before we get started, we did want to mention or shout out a couple of comments that we got from our last episode on expectations of being a therapist versus realities. So Julia, I think there was one from Instagram that you were gonna read out.
Yeah, we got a few from Instagram. There was one that really stood out to both of us. Someone who made a really good point. The account is Veracity Counseling Coaching. And they had pointed out that the old school, kind of very traditional blank slate approach from the therapist can, at least these days, be very triggering, especially for trauma survivors.
Yep.
And feeling a sense of shame during very vulnerable moments in therapy where they're disclosing things that they've never shared before, that might be a bit embarrassing or uncomfortable. And these days, people really are expecting a human response rather than a blank wall. And not getting that feedback can really trigger a sense of discomfort and embarrassment. And that's not really something we touched on last time. And I think it's a fantastic point.
Yeah. Honestly, we could do a whole episode on that. Again, thank you and a shout out to Veracity Counseling Coaching. And we unfortunately only have time to mention one more. We got a lot of really great responses. This one came from a comment on YouTube, and this is a person who is also a therapist with their own therapy podcast. And this is coming from at the NY Wellness. That's at the NY Wellness. So NY as in New York. And this person commented on the idea of self-disclosure in therapy, meaning when therapists actually disclose a little bit about themselves, what he mentioned was that a lot of people nowadays are really just wanting therapists to be real and just be themselves, just be like real, down-to-earth human beings. And that is kind of related to what our other comments have been. And I just thought that was a really great observation because it's been true in my practice anyway. So yeah, if you want to check out any of these accounts, we've got the handles up here. And for now, I think we're good to go. So shall we transition?
Definitely. Yeah. So you and I have our own kind of personal thoughts on green flags when it comes to looking for a therapist from our own experiences, kind of being in this world, rubbing elbows with a lot of different therapists, seeing a lot of different marketing strategies. And so based on our experience, I think we have some unique perspectives on green flags and a few red flags that might not come up in most, top 10 lists that you see out there online. So I'm excited to dig into this.
Yeah, me too. So is there anything that you want to start us off with? Because I've got a couple in mind. But yeah, if there's anything that's burning on your mind, let me know, Julia.
Oh gosh. Okay, green flag number one,
Yes.
offering a free consultation call. I think
Mm-hmm.
is an excellent first signal
Yeah.
that a therapist is willing to take the time. They're not getting paid for this, but it's something that indicates the care about your time, getting the
Mm-hmm.
right fit. They understand that they can't help everyone. And there's no presumption there that they're going to be the right fit for you. They really want to speak with you and hear what you have to say, what you need,
Yeah.
see how you feel speaking to them. And I think that's really a sign of honoring that therapeutic relationship and understanding how important it is in the process. And I mean, there's so many studies that acknowledge that the relationship is 50% of what goes into successful therapy. So,
Yeah.
anyone who has the means of offering a consultation call and does is, in my book, showing a lot of respect to any potential client.
Yeah, and I want to second that. This really applies, I think, mostly to private practice, meaning
Mm-hmm.
therapists and clinicians that are in their own private practice, because we don't have as many constraints as the folks do who are working in like community mental health or inpatient, outpatient hospital settings. Sometimes those folks just don't even they don't have the time, or there isn't a setup for them to offer a
Mm-hmm.
free phone consultation, or somebody else does the consultation and then they get stuck with a different therapist. For those people, I think in private practice, I think when they don't offer a free consultation, it can be a sign of sort of a sense of arrogance a little bit, in the sense of like, well, we can just talk and work with absolutely anybody and anything, which is not really accurate. It's not a wise assumption as a therapist. I think if you've
Yeah.
gone through training or any kind of training, you know that there are certain things that you're naturally going to be better at working with for certain conditions. And also, we all have different personalities too. So you're not going to gel with every single client. And like you said, the relationship is the most important. So
Yeah.
that's got to be prioritized.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an important distinction. I wouldn't judge a therapist working in community mental health or a hospital setting or really structured environments like that because they often
Mhm.
don't have that option. They kind
Yeah.
of have their day laid out by someone else, and they don't
Yeah.
necessarily get to say, I'm going to do something unpaid for the next 15 minutes.
Yeah,
You know?
and that's a good point too, because that's for those of us in private practice, it's time out of our workday that we're not getting paid to do that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for those in those highly structured environments, like they often don't have the resources to do that either. They're, you know, all the environments are very tightly controlled, and there just isn't money to pay them for their time necessarily. So there's less freedom for them as well. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's a little different, I think, in private practice.
Yeah. And you're looking for not only the right fit for what you've been trained in and where your expertise lies, but it is also a personal fit and just kind
Yeah.
of, yeah, having that harmony somehow. I mean, I
Yeah.
I had a consultation call a week or two ago,
Mm.
and it's like we were just sort of speaking in different languages or something. Like they
Yeah.
were asking me questions and I was answering them, and kind of repeatedly they were like, I don't understand what you mean. And then I would explain it again in like a different way, and they'd be like, yeah, I still don't understand. And it's like, okay, yeah,
Okay.
maybe we're just not that compatible.
Yeah.
um, which
Yeah.
is really good to know before sitting down for a 45-minute or 60-minute session and
Right.
going
Every
through that
week.
for an hour instead of 15 minutes.
Right. And, that I would imagine that would really be a big barrier too to making progress and change
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
therapy. I'm
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, it's a really good opportunity for them to say, all right, let me look for someone else that
Mhm.
I like get their communication style and vice
Yeah.
versa. Cause I was doing the best I could. And honestly, like a lot of their questions were pretty typical. So I answer
Right.
them a lot and I tend to answer them pretty similarly. And usually
Yeah.
people are like, oh, okay, get it. But if someone is just like really not understanding me and I'm doing the best I can,
That's
it's just a good signal. Like, this
it's not
is
good enough.
fine. We don't have to work together.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense to move forward. I'm really curious if you'd care to share, like, how did you end up navigating that consult?
um, yeah, I mean, I did my best to explain from different angles. Um, Ultimately, I think their concerns were up my alley. So I
Mhm.
did say, like, if you do want to work together, I would be happy to have an initial session with you.
Mhm.
Because sometimes, you figure these things out as you go. I just wanted to give them
Yeah.
that option. I wasn't going to say, like, well,
Right.
clearly we're not understanding each other. So I don't think we should work together. But I think they made the right decision for themselves. And I did not hear from them again.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it sounds like you acknowledge, like, it wasn't, necessarily gonna be a terrible experience, but it's a red flag in a way where if you're really having trouble sort of understanding the person you're speaking with,
Hmm.
that can feel really demoralizing if that's the person you're supposed to be opening up to. Like, the communication has to be
Hmm.
pretty solid. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's the whole thing. It's that, and then, sometimes people will say something they're struggling with that I don't have any training in, and that's
That's
kind
a
of
good
an
one.
easy, like, I don't think I'm the right fit for you. I'm not gonna be
Yeah.
able to really get into that the way you deserve to get into that.
And I think that's a really good point. It makes me wonder a little bit about something that comes up a lot in the therapy field. There isn't a lot of discussion or education around specialties
Hmm.
in therapy school, really, as much as there is, let's say, in medical school. It's not as Sometimes it's not as clearly defined either.
Hmm.
Nevertheless, there really are certain things that need to be that it's better to send people to specialists for, and there's, like, advanced training that postgraduate therapists will
Hmm.
have to go through in order to understand how to treat that kind of condition. For example, OCD, ADHD, um, eating disorders, addiction, trauma.
Hmm.
Am I missing anything else you can think of?
Those are some of the big ones. And again, it
Yeah.
also depends on the severity of the issue.
Yeah, that's true
Um,
too.
I mean, we're all trained to have a basic background in all of this stuff, but if you're having really serious issues with one of these areas, you definitely want someone who's had additional training, or at the very least is under the supervision of someone who has that
Yeah,
expertise, which is very
yeah.
common because we all need to learn.
Mhm.
And when you're training in this area, you're regularly consulting with that expert. And
Right.
those people can do really good work too. But you just want to kind of look for someone who probably has that expertise versus someone who has a general understanding who can help but maybe only so far.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this isn't like there's some nuance to this as well. It's not exactly the same as it would be, let's say, going to like, I don't know, a bone specialist if you've got a disease related to the skeleton or your
Mm-hmm.
to your bones, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not exactly the same as that, but there's a similarity to it. And look, this is healthcare. You need to be trained. That brings me to one other green flag, red flag sort of thing. And this doesn't happen a ton, but I feel like I need to sort of call it out a little bit is you should always look for somebody that is a trained therapist that is licensed in your state,
Yeah.
province, wherever. Because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I've heard some horror stories.
Me too.
Yeah. What have you
Okay.
Yeah, what do you think?
Years and years and years ago, I went on a date with someone, like
Ah,
an app date with
okay.
someone that on their profile said they were a therapist. So I was like, "Oh, cool." And it turned out that they had no training or license or even a permit in therapy. They just decided they're going to market themselves as a therapist.
But on a dating app?
Well,
Not
they like, when it says, what do you
Yeah,
do or
right.
whatever, I'm a therapist. So I was like,
Yeah, it
assuming
could
this is a licensed therapist. But
yeah.
then in the conversation on the date, they told me they actually have no training at all. And they felt like they have a knack for this.
Oh,
And
wow.
they had clients, and it was so messed up because being that they're not registered in any way whatsoever with the state or anything, there is actually no regulation or like there's like no
No.
penalty because they're not breaking
Well
anything that they've signed off on.
no, I mean, so mental health counseling, like our degree, clinical social work, psychology, those are all protected titles. So
Right,
if
but I think you have to, and again, this is like an area I don't know exactly, but I think you have to actually be licensed and then perform some sort of malpractice or something to get in trouble. But if
yeah,
you have
somebody
no
has
license and you're not affiliated with any governing
right.
body whatsoever,
Oh my God.
who is going to get you in trouble? Because you're not like associated with anything.
Julia, that's awful.
I
I'm
know
I'm sorry, it's
it was really messed up. And I was just like, oh, what? So
Oh my
that's my
God.
horror story. What horror stories do you have?
I'm so curious. I just want to know how that date ended and like if
I was
if you remember.
so like flummoxed and confused. It actually took me a little bit to process like
Yeah.
what? How would you even think to do this? It's like, I mean, I guess people fudge these things all the time. Like you might say, like, I'm a licensed contractor and you're really not, or like I'm a licensed plumber and you're not. Things like that. But I've never heard of a fake license there. I mean, I don't think they ever said they were licensed, but they just like promoted themselves as therapists. And so many people don't really
Don't
know to
check.
check. I mean, you're not
Yeah.
gonna be like, "Well, what's your license number? I wanna look it up." You
Well, so
know?
and I think that's a big issue. Like you're right in that the only way that that person would have been able to would the only way to put a stop to that with that person practicing without a license would be for someone to call a licensing board. and say, and then like which licensing board would that person call? Because what kind of therapist? There's so many
Well,
kinds of
that's the
therapists.
thing. I don't know what maybe you could send like a cease and desist or something, but I don't think you could really get in trouble.
I think you could, because it is like, so I know for like, I'm a licensed mental health counselor. You are as well.
Yeah.
Or that's one of your licenses. If we were to call ourselves licensed mental health counselors without being registered, I don't know if it's a criminal offense, but it's punishable. Like
Okay.
we're not, by law, you're not allowed to, like, I can't call myself a psychologist because that's not my
Right.
degree.
Maybe the fact that they were just saying therapist, it's like so vague.
It is, but it's like this person's potentially putting people in danger because they don't have any. I mean, you can do harm if you're not trained, and people do all the time. And that's, yeah. So just
Yeah.
a shout out for folks here in case you're looking for therapists. These are some sort of outliers. They don't happen all
Yeah,
the
yeah. I mean,
time.
that's the only time I've
Yeah.
ever heard of it, but it's valuable to know you can actually look up your therapist's license.
And people should be doing that,
Yeah,
to be
you can
honest.
check and
Yeah.
see if their license
Yeah.
is valid. You can check and see
Yeah.
if they have any I don't know what you call it, like dings against your
Your license. Yeah.
license,
What is it?
like probationary
Yeah.
punishment or something. Um, but anyway, yeah, you can go to the New York State Office of Professions and
Hmm.
find the search tool. And anyway, so what are your horror stories?
Yeah, so we can put a link to that below. But
Yes.
so some of my horror stories. I think, I mean, one, this isn't half as bad as yours. I mean, I've seen a lot of people um sort of leaning into like s- using misleading language to say that they're clinical therapists, or therapists that can treat, you know, they're not actually saying I can treat this or I can treat that or any kind of mental health issue, but um the suggestion is there.
Hmm.
And when you look into it a little bit further, maybe they did like a very basic training in, like, I don't know, conflict mediation or coaching or something like that. Now, coaching is also something that's not regulated by the state, or whatever area you live in. It's not generally regulated. There's an international body right now that's, I don't know much about it, but the point is that
Hmm.
um, anybody can really call themselves a coach if they want to. There's no way to really enforce that. Whereas with us, it is a protected title, and
Hmm.
that, can really, like, there could be a case made for that person that you went on a date with. Anyway, so that's not really a horror story, but I've seen a lot of people just kind of promoting themselves as sort of, and kind of doing therapeutic like work that just isn't the same. Um,
Okay.
I'm trying to think of something more specific. Well, okay, so here's maybe a different, again, a slightly less like out there or outlandish example. No, I can't think of anything specifically that's as bad as yours. I'm sorry. Not in that way. I can think of others, just not
Uh-huh.
just not in that way. Um,
Yeah.
but no, I'll give you another example of
Okay.
a different type of horror story. So
Yeah.
yeah, so before I got postgraduate training in trauma therapy, just to become like a trauma specialist, and I was working at somebody else's clinic in New York, and I had a consult call with someone, a very lovely client, who, asked me if I'd be comfortable working with their type of trauma. They were able to specify what it was, and given some of the placements that I had been in prior to that clinic, I accrued hours after graduate school in very heavily like traumatized populations. And child welfare in New York. So just working with families and stuff like that, lots of trauma there. So I felt pretty comfortable in the sense that I had seen a lot of that already. And I told the individual I'm not a trauma specialist, but I would be happy to see you, and maybe we can talk through some of this and see. And then, if we hit a wall with it, I can refer you out. And so we had that discussion. And they agreed and they came in, and therapy was going well. But we did come to a point after a couple of months where it was like, I think it would be better to refer you out. And so I suggested at the time for this person to seek out an EMDR therapist. Now, EMDR is a specific kind of therapy, very focused on trauma. And I wasn't trained in it at the time. So I didn't know who to find or who to look for. So I went to ask like one of my therapy colleagues if they knew someone, and I got a recommendation, and then I gave it to my client. Next week, my client comes back, says, "I reached out to the person you sent me to," and I was like, "Oh, great! How did it go?" And my client asked the therapist a question about, treatment length, a very typical question that people will ask: "How long do you think this will take?" Something like that. And the therapist laughed and said,
Mm-hmm.
"I can't really give you an estimate." And to be fair, like, yeah, it's hard to give an estimate, but it's also a fair question. Most
Yeah.
people want to know, you know? Um,
Yeah.
and
I mean,
so, yeah,
oh, sorry to
go
interrupt,
ahead.
but like this is
No.
pure speculation, but what do you think the laugh was about?
I don't know because I wasn't there, and I didn't know this therapist personally myself either. That's why, and I'll just say after that experience, I felt so bad that I always now do a little bit of research on who I'm referring people to.
Yeah.
Not just a little bit of research, but I try to like talk to them in advance. And through the years, I have built up a network, so I know some people. But
Yeah.
that was rough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the laugh. I don't know how my client was interpreting it, but I think the laugh might have been sort of a oh, haha, you think I can give you this answer? It's so silly that you're asking this question. That was the sense that I got from the description that my client gave.
Yeah.
Um, or it could have been a nervous laugh too. That's I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, that could be like, oh gosh, they're putting me on the spot. They want a number. I don't know. I should know. And then kind of
Yeah.
that nervous laugh or something.
But I don't know. I felt like trauma is sensitive. It's
Yeah.
possible that my client may have taken it in
That's
a
also
negative way,
possible. That's also
but
possible.
it's also possible
Um,
they didn't. So I never referred
yeah.
someone to that person again.
No. I'm also thinking it could be
Yeah.
burnout. Like, I've heard this
Yeah.
question 100 times. I'm sick of answering it.
Uh,
That's
that's
also possible.
that's a big pot. That's probably it, or was
Yeah.
probably it.
But okay, so
But
yeah, but yeah, I mean, a red flag, I would say, is a therapist not taking a genuine question seriously.
yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
a better way of putting it.
Yeah. Or,
Yeah.
I mean, at least you need to feel like they're taking it seriously. And
Yeah.
sometimes it is that rapport thing. Like maybe
Mhm.
that laugh was coming from somewhere else, or maybe it wasn't even a full laugh. Maybe it was a like,
Yeah.
huh, yeah, or something that was like
Yeah.
interpret. Like, I mean, who knows? But that's why it's all about fit.
Yes, it is.
Um,
And again, like
yeah.
people do sometimes misinterpret things, especially
Hmm.
when you're talking about trauma. People are,
Yes.
you know, it, I know it wasn't easy for my client to reach out in the first place to either of us, and that didn't help though.
No.
Whatever the interaction was.
Yeah. And it is hard as a therapist to, I mean, it's true. Like things get misinterpreted
Yeah.
all the time. I mean, I have that happen in sessions with clients that I have a great relationship with, and
Yeah.
I can
Same.
see on their face it's not hitting in the way that I
Right.
meant it, and we have to kind of process that. So it does happen all the time. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
Other green flags.
Yes, let's go back to the good stuff.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I was thinking about this before. Another, I think a really great green flag in general is when you first start speaking with that person, that they just make you feel at ease, or there's
Mhm.
something about them that makes you feel not necessarily reassured, but that you could kind of get comfortable enough.
Mhm.
Maybe not to spill everything, it doesn't
Mhm.
have to all come out at once, but just that they make you feel comfortable. I think that's the first
Yeah.
one.
Yeah,
Before
and it's a special kind of relationship where you want to feel safe and cared for, and that they truly are there to support your well-being. But I think it's also important that you feel that they're going to challenge you a little bit, and they're not
Mhm.
going to just agree with every single thing you say, and
That's a good point.
make you seem like you're always right and everyone else is always wrong, because that can actually make things worse.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think
Yeah.
you want someone that like, okay, if they're going to push a little against something I'm saying, it's because they believe it's going to be helpful to me and I trust them enough to be there for that.
Yeah. And that's a great point. I think anybody going into therapy for the first, second, third, whatever, however many times, um, you want to be challenged. You should,
Mhm.
you should be trying to look for somebody that can poke a little bit at some of the defense mechanisms that we
Yeah.
all built up, you know?
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
otherwise you won't make progress.
Right. Like you don't want just like an expensive friend that's going
Yeah.
to be like, "Oh my gosh, you're so right. Yeah, that was so awful for them to do that to you." I mean, like you want
Yeah.
their support, but you want them to be
Yeah.
able to point out like some different perspectives,
Yeah.
challenge your thought process a little, and not to say you're wrong or anything, but just to say, what if we entertain some different perspectives? And, you
Yeah.
know, yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. And
yeah,
again, to be fair, it should always be coming from a compassionate place, but
exactly.
the
Exactly.
compassion doesn't mean pushover either.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of like a sports coach or something, like, or an
Yeah.
art critic. Like, you don't want someone that's going to be like, "That's amazing. That's beautiful," all the time. Like, you want someone
Yeah.
to be like, "I think actually this area could use
Yeah.
some improvement." you know?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And I think a lot of people sometimes or some people come in with a different conception of what that means,
Mhm.
to be pushed or challenged. And
Mhm.
or some people come in saying, I really want to be challenged. In the past I haven't been. And then they come in and it's like, actually, it's actually a little harder to
Yeah.
challenge this person because they're pushing back a lot. And it's interesting that way.
Yeah.
That's just
Yeah.
from the therapist perspective, though. But
Yeah, and I don't know where to give credit for this, but I've heard many times, and I think this is true, that any really good therapeutic relationship includes at least one moment where the therapist is frustrated with the client and the client is frustrated with the therapist. Might not be at the same
uh,
moment, but that's really the signal of a genuine relationship.
that's a good point.
What other relationship exists in life where there is zero frustration with the other person?
Like none.
And if there isn't, I think that is at least a yellow flag. It's like, what are we doing? Are we
Yeah,
just both people pleasing here and not getting to the
probably.
tough stuff?
I think I've heard some version of that in my own consultation, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, just the way
Yeah.
you put it was, I think, really excellent, which is that, you're gonna piss off each other. You're gonna piss each other off at some point,
Yeah. Because, I
and
mean, yeah, when you're
it's
trying to
okay.
change, like as the client, there's things that you've held on to that have in some way kept you safe and comfortable. And when
Yeah.
someone is trying to encourage you to step away from that, you're going to be like, fuck you. Like, I like this. This is working for me.
Yeah.
you
No, I
know?
think that's a great point, Julia. And it's funny because it's like this is sort of the dance that we do all day, I think. Is sort of how do
Mm-hmm.
we push just far enough so that people are going to be okay with it and maybe not, totally flooded, as that's maybe a more trauma therapy specific word, but also, you know, they're not going to be comfortable because they
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't be comfortable
No, it shouldn't be
completely.
comfortable all the time, but you should feel like you're with someone who wants the best for you
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
wants you to get where you're trying to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that is a great, great point. So definitely therapist green flag is somebody that will push you.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
of course, respectfully, but will definitely push you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good distinction. It's not a good sign when someone is pushing you hard and it feels like too. I mean, you have to be honest about what is too much, really. But,
Yeah.
someone that's going to say, like, you need to do this or, really,
Well, yeah.
yeah.
So, and that actually makes me think of an example. I had a client years ago that came in. Actually, I've had a lot of clients over the years come in and sort of mention some really kind of eyebrow raising behaviors of previous clinicians. Not always, but every once in a while, I hear these stories. And one of them was just kind of saying that it seemed like the previous clinician they were with was really giving them a lot of advice in the sense
Mm.
of, I think you should do this. I don't think that that's a good decision for you, kind of thing.
Mhm.
For those of you who don't know, we're trained not to give advice, so to speak, right? And I'm putting that in air quotes because it's complicated. It's not super black and white. But yeah, we're not supposed to give advice. We're supposed to help you find your way. That's
Mhm.
really the point of therapy, is for you to come into your own, and let's dismantle some of those maladaptive coping skills, but it's for you to figure out your path.
Mhm.
Um, and so if you hear a therapist saying in no uncertain terms, I think this is a bad idea, unless it's something related to safety, like addiction, or where it's likely to be re-traumatizing for somebody. Otherwise, I don't know. That's
Yeah.
not a good idea.
And I think that's a really good point because it's pretty common that people assume that is the role of a therapist to give advice.
Yeah,
And
those who are new to
yeah,
therapy.
I
Yeah.
hear that all the time in consultation calls when I say, like, what are you looking for? And they'll say, I'm looking for advice. I'm looking for objective advice. I want
Yeah.
someone to tell me what I should do. Things like that. Because that does happen a lot on TV and movies and stuff. And it's very
Yeah.
appealing to think I can pay a professional advice
Mhm.
giver and they'll
Yeah.
give me the right direction.
Yeah.
But actually, it's not a good sign when a therapist's giving advice because they're skipping over the work. They're skipping over helping you remove the blocks in the way of your own inner wisdom and your own
Yeah.
authenticity And what a therapist thinks you should do is just based on their own life experience and their own values, which are very different than yours. And it's kind of the easiest thing to do, but the least helpful thing to do.
I think that's a really excellent point. That is, it's the easiest thing for the person on the other side to say, I think you should just do this. Like, just do it this way.
Uh-huh.
Whereas, for instance, ADHD coaching, which is different than ADHD therapy, where there are behavioral exercises, and then you're going through like a program and you're saying, okay, this is the plan. We're going to set it up like this. That's different. That's not advice giving. That's not, I don't think you should, I don't know, date this person or go to
Yeah.
this doctor or
Yeah. I think
go
you
to this
should
school
break
or something.
up. I think you should get a
Yeah.
divorce, things like that. But
Yeah.
I
That's
think
really
it,
unethical, actually.
yeah. But something like, I think it might be helpful if you read this book. I think it
Yeah.
might be helpful if you do this worksheet, something like that.
Yeah, that's different. But
Yes.
that falls in line with what you were describing earlier. That's not advice. That's a therapeutic tool. I think this could be helpful. Would you like to do this? And I mean, we're never going to be forcing our clients to do something. They're just not going to do it. And they're their own person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we can say, oh, I think it would be helpful to try journaling, see if you like it, or try this or try that, but not tell them a major life decision or something like that.
Yeah. And I've definitely heard about that too. Like
Yeah.
I've heard of clients saying like, my couples therapist said they think we should separate.
Oh.
Um and it's not like there was like violence or anything like unsafe going on. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, I would never
Yeah.
say that because it's your life and we don't know the outcome of you staying together or you
Yeah.
separating. I mean,
No, we're not all seeing, all,
yeah.
like omnipotent or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
it's not a good sign. That's a red flag for sure.
Yeah. So I think a lot of this stuff is pretty nuanced.
Hmm.
Um, Even when we say like, it's a bad sign when therapist tells you what to do, it,
Yeah.
it's like, what are they telling you to do?
Yeah.
And hopefully it's always open ended. Like, you might want to consider this. Would you like to
Yeah.
try this? I think another green flag is that they're always putting the responsibility for progress in your hands. Like,
Mm,
how much
that's a
work
good
do you want to
one.
do? How much effort do you want to put in between sessions? Okay, whatever that is, that's fine. That's just your
Mhm.
decision. That's going to be your journey.
Can you say just a little more, I'm using a very therapist type phrasing here, but can you expand on that a little bit and just tell us more? Like, what do you mean by that?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I like to process with people. Um, yeah, like, what are you expecting to get out of
Hmm.
this? What do you see as your role in getting there? What do you see as my role in getting there?
Yes.
And yeah, just getting really clear on who's responsible for what. And I do always like to point out that, I mean, for me, the therapy sessions are 45 minutes. So that's
Okay.
45 minutes of work a week with me. And how much more do you want to do on top of that? Because when
Mm,
you think about like how many hours in a week, how much do you want to capitalize on that? And what are you expecting to get out of what you're putting into it?
yeah. And I think that's an important distinction to make too, because like you, I've had a lot of clients and it's understandable. A lot of people will come in, especially if they're in pain or they're struggling, sort of wanting answers, understandably wanting answers. I
Yeah.
think sometimes it can become habitual, though, to go in and say, or like a sign of like, well, this is a person of authority, the therapist, so they should be telling me. It's really more about, again, teaching somebody to do it themselves and
Mm-hmm.
trying to break down what might be going on to prevent that. And
Right.
what is happening that there may not be motivation, or that the motivation is not exactly there, or is there a lack of confidence in their own judgment, and that's a whole other thing to work on.
Yeah, because our role is to help people take responsibility for their own emotional well being.
Yeah.
And it's really unethical to promote a reliance on us.
Yeah.
You want someone to feel like eventually they they could kind of be their own therapists. They understand a bit more about how to help themselves. So we're
Yeah.
always trying to promote that.
Yeah, and I do wanna, again, this is not perfectly black and white either, there's nuance. I do wanna add that, also for some people, it's okay to be in therapy for a really long time
For
too,
sure.
and
For
for a lot of
sure.
people,
And yeah,
actually.
it depends on your kind of attitude towards it. Like I have a lot of clients that are in therapy long term and they kind of view it more like going to the gym where
Mhm.
it's like a support system, but
Yeah,
it's not something that they're like, okay, I'm not going to think about or process anything that's bothering me until I get to therapy. And I'm going to dump it all out and then I'm going to shut it down for the rest of the week.
right, right, and that's a big difference, though, in
Mhm.
outlook.
Mhm.
Um, and also there are some people that, could use that support or just sort of a place to go to sort of maintain some of the gains that they've made.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
I don't
definitely.
believe, yeah, I also don't believe necessarily in staying in therapy for your entire life.
Mhm.
That's not a necessity. Um, it happens, but it's also okay
Yeah.
to take breaks.
As l I think it's appropriate to go to therapy for as long as it's helpful, and sometimes, like, overstaying that, then it becomes unhelpful at
Yeah,
a certain point, and that point could be anywhere from a few months to a decade or
yeah,
2 decades. There's no set time. You just have
yeah,
to be honest with yourself. But
yeah. And have a discussion with your therapist too.
yeah.
Flesh it out.
So, ooh, that's another red flag, I think, is
What's that?
therapists that just kind of want to keep their clients forever, regardless of how they're
Mm,
doing.
yeah, I think we were definitely alluding to that in terms of that green flag.
Uh-huh.
Yes. No, but um, there are some therapists out there that don't think as much about closure and about, like, what is it like to have this person go out on their own?
Mhm.
Um, and they'll
Mhm.
promote, like you said, that reliance on them, which is not
Mhm.
healthy. You know,
Yeah, that's serving the therapist, not the client.
I think that's a really great point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think a lot of these things take like very fine tuned observation to
Mhm.
pick up because they're so nuanced.
Yeah.
But yeah, these are just some of the things off the top of our head that
Yeah.
through observation, hearing from clients about their past experiences,
Yes.
talking to other therapists, all that stuff. So,
I wanna mention just one last one, and then maybe
yeah.
we can wrap it up for this
Yeah.
week. But, your therapist should also have a certain level of cultural sensitivity in the sense of, like, if you wanna see a therapist and you're okay with them being of a different, sort of identity, background, culture, race, religion, anything like that, or gender, um, it's okay to have a preference for what kind of therapist you wanna have. And if you don't really have much of a preference, it's also okay to ask, how do you feel about working with people from the trans community or people from, you know, whatever kind of minority background or from a cultural background that maybe you're not from, something like that. So these are also green flags in the sense of like, when you speak to that practitioner, do they seem comfortable with who you identify as?
Mm-hmm.
Do they seem prepared to kind of, you know, do you feel comfortable with their knowledge of your background?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes you can kind of hear it in the undertone of someone's answer, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I mean, remember, like, any therapist in private practice is in business and they make money by seeing
Yeah.
clients. So I'm sure like 99.9% really do want to be ethical and help people, and
Yeah.
they don't want to take away from what someone can get out of the process. But yeah, when you're searching for a therapist, of course you want to have your eyes and ears open, and I think a lot of it comes from really looking at someone's website,
Yeah.
um considering how they respond when you reach out, like, you know, what kind
Yeah.
of response you get, if you're having a consultation call, how that feels and how that's going, how the first handful of sessions are going, and even ongoing, you know,
Yeah.
um, to just
Those are
be
yeah.
discerning.
And yeah, on that note, I think this is probably a good place to wrap up. Any other thoughts, Julia, that you want to mention before we do?
Um, yeah, again, I would be curious if anyone listening would like to share some experiences they've had, like
Yeah.
signs they saw early on that their therapist was going to be a good fit, or
Yeah.
maybe signs they saw that in hindsight were warning signs, or things like
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I'd be curious. So if anyone has something like that to share, just respond wherever you are listening to this podcast, or even respond on our Instagram page.
Mhm. Or
But
YouTube.
yeah, YouTube, Spotify, wherever, just leave a comment. And
Yeah.
yeah, what about you, Sabrina?
Yeah, same. I think I'd love to hear just, reflections and, any thought. If any of what we said resonated, or if you've had some interesting experiences that you'd like to share, we would love to listen and to hear them.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
all therapists are human. None of us are perfect. We've
Yeah.
all made mistakes at
Hmm.
some point in all these areas, intentionally or not. I mean, usually not
Yeah,
intentionally,
I was gonna say most of the time.
but this is also an
Yeah.
interesting thing for us to learn from, any of the
Yeah.
comments. It's helpful for us too.
Yeah. So thank you for listening, and until next time.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Bye. You were just listening to Keeping Secrets, hosted by Sabrina Tropper and Julia Baum. If you like what you heard, leave us a review or a comment. We'd love to hear your suggestions, comments, questions, and topic requests. We do our best to respond to every single one, and you may even hear yours discussed in an upcoming episode. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts, and find us on Instagram and YouTube at Keeping Secrets Pod.
Keeping Secrets is the brainchild of Julia Baum and Sabrina Tropper, who also produced and directed this podcast. We're also responsible for all writing, research, graphic design, sound engineering, and video editing. Transcriptions by Riverside. As a reminder, this podcast does not constitute medical advice. While we strive to share the most accurate and up-to-date information, human error is to be expected, and this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes.